Want to create AR apps but have no clue where to start? This episode is for you, so let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR and AR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm Marcelo Lewin, a VR and AR developer, evangelist, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest today is Johnny Hamilton, a multimedia specialist at Providence St. Joseph Health, who has developed multiple augmented reality experiences. Today, we'll be speaking with Johnny all about AR and how to get started developing AR apps. Johnny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
I'm glad to have you here. I met you at Realities 360 conference. I took a super cool class. I got to be honest with you. I was not into AR. I'm hugely into VR, obviously the URL, right? But I was not into AR. And I took your class and man, I got so pumped. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to make the jump and get into AR. So I have to thank you for getting me really into AR as a developer. Before we get started, why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a former credentialed teacher. I was also a technology director at a K-8 school, entrepreneur, a consultant, both with large and small companies. And I'm currently a senior learning designer at Providence Health and Services, and also a creative director at my own company, Tuit Education Solutions.
So like all of us, you've got two full-time jobs.
Oh, yeah. Always got to have a side hustle.
That's the way it goes with this industry, right? I mean, media creation, you never just do one thing.
No, you do the thing that brings the stability and your bread and butter home, but you also do things that follow your passion that you are really interested in. And that's what I do with my consulting on the side.
Makes sense. So how did you get into VR and AR as an end user? What was your first VR experience?
Well, my first VR experience, I did get a Samsung phone specifically to get the gear so I could actually try that out. But before that, my first real one, I was at a trade show and I actually used the HTC Vive, and that's with the two handheld controllers, and it was a immersion experience. And it was a completely new developed experience from the Gronstedt group. It was a nursing environment at a nursing station. And I was teleporting using the controllers, but most importantly, I was able to pick up things with the two controllers. And it was a crazy experience because I was really in there and I was using my body, which was, to pick up things and so forth. And when everything was done and I took off the headset, it was like, oh, wait, I'm back here. It was a profound experience being that immersed into that space.
Your mind totally immersed you in it and you were just gone, right? I had the same experience. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. And that was different than when I used my personal gear, which just had one controller on it and my phone that was using it. And that was more like watching. It was very immersive, but I wasn't physically there. When I had the two handheld controllers, that's when everything changed for me.
Well, in 3DOF versus 6DOF, right? That was the big difference.
Yes, it was huge.
What about AR? What was your first AR experience that convinced you to get into AR?
My first one was looking at other people doing Pokemon Go. I actually never played it because I'm like, that just doesn't float my boat. But I am always looking for authoring platforms where I can do something. And so actually my first AR experience was looking at, or actually creating one of my own. And I did that in Wikitude. It was a real pain to use, but I created something, that was putting an image on a tracking marker, and seeing that for the first time and actually holding a piece of paper with a tracking image on it and moving that piece of paper so the image would skew a little bit. That blew my mind in terms of, wait a minute, what could be done with this? So that was really my first real experience with AR, was actually doing something, creating something with it.
So that's why it also convinced you to become a VR AR developer?
Yes, I'm a big proponent of what can technology do that can enhance our lives and always looking toward the next thing. And that's when I see what's possible with AR and VR in terms of enhancing the experiences we normally have. To me, it's a paradigm shift. It's very powerful, and it can actually change a lot of things. So as a developer, both in my day job and my side job, I see this as a huge opportunity.
Now, you mentioned Wikitude, and we're going to get into that later because that's a tool you can use for creating AR. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So just in case people are listening, they're like, what is that? Ask him that. We'll get to it. But what is your favorite, as of today, AR or VR experience? Let's do an AR since this is all about AR.
My favorite AR experience is the IKEA app. And that is being able to hold a phone up or a tablet up and then place a piece of furniture in the room that you're in. There are other things like the Star Wars app and the Lego app. There's other things that are really cool and even have a better experience. But to me, those are more one-off, that they're really cool, but they don't have as much utility. And to me, that's the deciding factor of what makes it my favorite. And to me, the utility of, I would like to get a piece of furniture there in my room, whichever room that is, and you can plop it in there, and it looks real. You can look it around, the light, the shading, all the other kind of stuff. That's what's exciting to me, because that solves a problem. It's not that's a cool thing to play with. That's where it excites me.
It's funny you mentioned that because we just built a craft room for my wife in a spare room we have. And literally yesterday, I was showing her the IKEA Place app, because she's looking for a desk to put in there. And I go, let's check it out. And she was blown away by it because we literally looked at some of the desks she liked and we put it exactly in the location. And then she was looking at it from one point of view. I go, no, walk around. You can see it all around. She goes, what? And was blown away by that because when I first placed it, she was like, oh yeah, this is cool, but what's the big deal? I go, walk. And then she goes, oh, wow.
And then you can actually see it in the room. And that's there's that piece of magic that's there of, I didn't realize that could happen. And that actually informs you and makes you, in IKEA's case, it solves a business case of how do we get people to buy our stuff as opposed to somebody else's stuff. And that same desk, or almost same desk, could be in several places. But the user experience of, I'm going to go to IKEA the next time I need to buy something, any kind of furniture thing. And they become top of mind. And that's what excites me about this too, is that it solves those kind of business cases.
Yep, it's definitely functional. All right, well, let's jump into developing these AR apps that we're all going crazy about. So let's start out with we just kind of spoke about one, real world examples of AR. Where else does it make sense to use AR?
You can take a look at some other places that are just screaming for an enhancement. And that's the way I want everybody to think about this, is what are some experiences that can be enhanced? If you're sitting at a doctor's office or waiting at a restaurant for either the food or waiting to figure out what's on the menu, if it's a walk-up place, you want more information and you're waiting. That's a great time to enhance that experience. If you are at a museum and you're looking at a little card and the artifact, that's a great place to get more information. Same thing with, you go to a new location. You're not quite sure where everything is, and you could do wayfinding to find out either how to get to a place or what's that place or what's this store or what's happening over there. And another thing is, whenever you're writing a thank you card or a business card, those are other opportunities to do more than just what the printed word can say to communicate more information.
I saw a real cool restaurant app on LinkedIn. I think it was before yesterday. You literally point it at the dish, and then you pick the dish you want, and it shows you the food on top of your dish in full high res. You can spin it around, and then you order it.
That's amazing.
It was completely amazing. We went out for Japanese last night, of course, to celebrate 4th of July, which makes total sense. And I was showing my wife this, and I'm like, check this out. Imagining ordering the sushi, because, I had the pictures in the menu at the restaurant. And instead of looking at this thing, you're looking at the dish. You're pointing your camera at the dish, and you literally see the full dish there, and you can spin it around, zoom in, and the whole thing, just like you would if it was there in front of you. It was photorealistic, 3D images, so it just looked like it was there. And I thought, what a great way to use AR in a real world situation, right?
Because you want to see what the food looks like. And you could even take that to another level of, let me see how it's prepared, or let me hear the chef talk about, I love this dish because, even if it's just 20 seconds, I'm going to be more inclined to buy the thing that the chef was like, I learned this recipe from my uncle, or it has these fresh new ingredients. Whatever it is, it's that story. And now I am bought into that space. It's not just a dish that I want to eat. It's something that I have a greater connection with.
Right. In fact, they had a sushi that was a chef special, and it would have been great to say, why is it a chef special? Let me hear the chef tell me why. So I completely agree with you. I thought that was really neat. So from a development perspective, what's your process when you're designing that experience or what it's going to be? Guide us through your process.
Well, I go with, and I want to tell everybody who's listening, don't go directly to, what tools or features am I going to use? Take a step back and think about, what's the story? What's the experience? What's it like when somebody first encounters the message in order to have that AR experience? What's that? And actually create a story. A person walks into a restaurant, and then identify what the need is that you want to enhance. So we can continue with the restaurant. A person comes in, they're hungry, and they want to choose what they want to eat. They're not quite sure what they want to have. How can we enhance that? And then from there, now that we have who it is and what their need is, what can we do to help them or to make it a surprising and delightful experience? How can we tell our story? That's the perspective from which I start building that particular experience. And so being versed in, I know that I could do a video, I could do a 3D object, I could do a link to something or a picture. What is the first piece that I want them to encounter? What would help them do that next part of the story? So it could be, I want to first see what the food is. So, because that's the first step. Well, what does this actually look like? And then maybe what might be special about it. So when I'm hungry and I'm trying to figure out what to eat, pictures would be great so I can see the different food. If the budget is there, then sure, let's make that into a 3D. The next step is, somebody knows what food is there. What are the things would they want to have? So we could take a look at that and do an additional video of the chef saying something. And then there could be an additional thing of, do people want to share what they want? So there could be a social media posting, or maybe going to Instagram. So there's a variety of things based on what the client wants and what the user needs, and building experiences based on that.
So really building that whole story. Now, part of that story, after you build that, do you prototype? And if so, what tools do you use for prototyping AR?
So I do. The whole idea with this is AR and VR is so new that we don't really have good ideas about what actually works. We don't have good use cases. And so the idea is to iterate everything. So you start small with something, and then you get feedback on it. And then you iterate again, and then you test it and you get feedback. And you need to get real feedback from your target audience. So it's not that I'm going to create something, it's going to be great, and it's going to land perfectly. It's very rare that happens. The better approach is to create something, get feedback, and continue to do a cycle of iteration. In terms of the tool to use, I do one of two things. I either do a paper model, so I just have, this is an experience, and I just basically draw it out, because that is what creates that story. It creates an easy to use story that I'm showing somebody. That's one way of doing it. And then the next is actually to build it in the tool that I'm using. Actually don't use a separate prototyping tool beyond paper. So it jumps from paper to, here's the minimum viable project, the MVP of this first round of iteration. So here's what it could look like. Oh, that looks cool, says the client. How about this, and could it do that? Yes, it can. Let's try this. And so we do the next round in the authoring tool. And to be specific, the one that I use the most is Zapper. It's a easy to use platform, and that's the tool that I use when I'm doing my prototyping, is the actual authoring tool.
I see. So if you're using Unity, let's say, or any other tool, you would start prototyping basically there and iterate until you have the full app. That's your process.
Correct. That's my process. Yes.
So what core technologies should a developer learn, like programming languages, to do AR development today?
So it is always great to have some kind of programming language, be familiar with JavaScript, be familiar with how Unity might work. It's knowing the different types of, and again, if you're familiar with any kind of Java scripting, you're going to understand the language. And any tool that you're using will have that as the core basic language, but then there's going to be interfaces on top and the nuances depending on any platform that you're using. But you'll have an understanding of the logic and the sequence. And sometimes there are tools and apps that you can use that automate a lot of that. So you have to do very little or sometimes even no coding. But I think it's very essential to know JavaScript, at least be familiar with it, not to be an expert coder. And also, obviously, HTML, that you understand what that language at least looks like and be able to reverse engineer some code that you can see, and then you just modify certain things out of it in order to create the experience that you want.
Now, that's more for web AR. What about if you're using ARCore and ARKit? Can you explain the difference between them, and what languages do you need to code each of those in?
So ARCore is with Android and ARKit is with Apple. And understanding the JavaScript language that is behind them in order to code them. And like I said, there are some tools that automate some of those procedures. I haven't delved that deeply into developing from scratch in those native codes, so I can't speak to that from an experiential point of view. But I have taken a look within there, and I could read and understand what's going on, but being able to efficiently code in there is not my strength right now.
I think with ARCore, which is, like you said, Android's or Google's version of an API, I believe that's Java, full Java. And ARKit, I think it uses Swift to code. And you have to use those, right, for creating full native apps that run on the phone versus web apps, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for the clarification. Yes, absolutely.
So what other apps can one use to speed up the process of AR development? I know you mentioned Zappar before, but what other tools can one use?
One of the primary ones is Vuforia. That has been used quite a bit. They have a good developer community around them. Wikitude is another tool that is used quite a bit. And they all have different strengths and approaches that they're able to make in terms of providing you with the tools, not only to author, but to help you develop those experiences.
I see. So we're talking about Wikitude, Vuforia, Zappar, and I'm sure if you do a Google search, there'll be tons more, but those are good ones to get started. I know in your presentation, I use Zappar or Zappar, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but to quickly create some AR apps, and it was pretty easy to use. So let's get into a little bit of the hardware now, the actual hardware that AR needs to function. And I know there's like gyroscopes, the camera, magnometers, GPS, accelerometers. Can you explain a little bit about those and how important those are for an AR experience?
Sure. This is one of the funny things with AR and VR, but people just see the end result. And you could think of it as people see the cake, but they don't understand all the ingredients that go into it. And there really needs to be all of these different tools functioning seamlessly together in the back in order to create that full experience. So you do have a camera. Obviously, that's how you get the input in to see what's going on. You do need an accelerometer which shows where you are in terms of moving from one thing to the next. That's not only, as we talked about, 3 and 6 DOF, which is the degrees of freedom as you're moving up, down, left, right, forward, backward, and panning and tilting. All of those things the accelerometer captures. And so as you move your phone, it will be able to see within a 3D space where it is in relation to what the camera is now seeing.
Basically motion tracking.
That is correct. The GPS, if you are doing wayfinding, it will be able to pinpoint down to, depending on the phone that you have, but within a couple of feet of where you are based on the satellites that are floating around the Earth. And it's able to pinpoint exactly where you are. If you are doing a wayfinding app to give you directions, or if you're using Google Street View, which people don't realize that's a augmented reality tool, but that's actually what that is. It not only it identifies this location where you are, but using the accelerometer, what direction you're pointing in. And the other tools that go in there all coordinate in a real-time fashion in order to find out where you are and what you're looking at as you're moving around.
In your angle and position and all that, which is really crazy to think about when you have a phone this small that has so much power to take all those hardware components and make a decision live so the AR experience can feel like it's real.
Yes. You take that to the next level of now we're going to place a digital object within the camera's view and integrate the two. So what you see is a melding, and that's why it's augmented reality. So it puts that digital layer on top of the physical that you're seeing.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's a perfect transition to my next question, which is what are anchors, and then something that Google just introduced, cloud anchors. Can you explain those two things?
Sure. So when the camera sees let's just pretend you're looking in your living room and you see a table. Assuming that your table has a different color than your floor, there would be a visual indicator of the table is brown and the floor is gray, and the difference where the edge is and where the corners of that table are, as seen from the camera, are at this point, this corner of the table. That's an anchor. And as you go along to another defining feature of that table, that would be another anchor. So using that visual recognition, the table is now identified as, I'm going to make this number up, 14 different anchors. And that's how, as you start moving around, the camera and obviously the AR app would be able to recognize as you move around, these different anchors are moving in relation to each other. Now, the great thing, which has now just come out, is cloud anchors. And that means that where those anchors are based within that app are now being fed to the cloud. And if you are looking with your camera and I'm looking at my camera at the same table from different points of view, both of those anchors are being fed to the cloud at the same time, and then information is coming back so that we could actually both be looking at augmented reality character sitting on that table, you from your angle, me from mine, both seeing the same character, but from different perspectives. That's because the cloud anchors are being shared, basically. Anchors from my end and anchors from your end, both being fed to the cloud, and then our respective data points coming back.
And whatever objects each of you place in there, you can see each of those objects on either device, which is something really, really cool. Something we take for granted in real life, where if you're looking at one table and I'm looking at the same table and there's a glass there, we can both see that. But in AR, it exists in one device, but it doesn't in the other device. And now with cloud anchors, it can exist in both devices or multiple devices.
Yes. And the key with that is the difference between the IKEA Place app. Both of us could be running concurrent apps at the same time and looking at the desks, but they wouldn't necessarily be going to the cloud to share that data. That's not its intent. But if the design of the AR app was to say, we're both going to take a look at it, and if I make a change to mine, it's going to make a change to what you see in yours, because the data is going to the cloud and being not only assembled, but shared there. That's the multiplayer part. And that's the exciting piece.
And in that case, I would even suggest to IKEA, make it cloud anchors, because it would be a perfect way for me and my wife to collaborate in a room. And, I place the table here and she goes, oh, what do you think about it here? And she can move it. And we're both seeing the same thing in our different devices from different angles, right?
That's right. Oh, let's change the color. And she changes on hers and it would change on yours. And that's the whole idea of consistently iterating. IKEA would not want to build that at the very beginning. And before they launched it, they would want to build the first piece. And then later, let's get some consumer demand. Let's find out what they want as additional features and then build those things out.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about occlusion. What is that?
So occlusion is something that we take for granted in our daily lives. It's just part of reality. We'll continue with the table in a room example. Your dog comes in and then they sit behind the table and you can see a little bit of the dog, like their head, but you don't see the rest of their body. That is occlusion because the dog is being occluded or hidden by the table, but not all of the dog. So you see part of the dog, maybe the tail and maybe the head. When you have an augmented reality piece that's happening, what we're able to do currently with most experiences is able to add a layer of a dog within an environment. People go, that's great. But if you were to try to put the dog behind the table, that becomes extremely tricky because in order to make it match what reality is, that you only see part of the dog and the table is covering it, what the AR experience needs to do is to say, okay, the dog is placed here and the dog is actually behind the table. So what's the definition of the table? Where is that plane of tableness being in front of the dog? So now I need to put the dog behind there, and now there needs to be a mask of that table over part of the dog. And then it needs to do that 30 times a second in order to get a nice smooth representation of that, which is a crazy amount of not only processing, but also data visualization in terms of object recognition, what's actually being seen there. So it's a very difficult thing to pull off in AR, of being able to have a digital object behind a real object and having part of it occluded or hidden.
That's something that still needs more development on, but I'm sure we'll get there. So what are some tips for developing user experiences in UI for AR? Do you have any tips that, do this, but don't do that kind of tips?
Absolutely. So one thing is to just include some gamification principles. And some of those principles are to surprise and delight. That's a key thing. You want this to be an engaging, fun experience. It doesn't necessarily need to be, and none of the gamification principles, I don't mean to say that AR and VR experiences need to be games, but these principles, such as to surprise and delight, it's a fun, delightful experience. You also want to think about player types. Are there things that are social? The three player types typically are social, achiever, and explorer. So that basically means when you're developing an experience, what the user experience is, do you want to have a social component to it so that some people will want to share with others, whether digitally or just, hey, take a look at my screen, see that. Another type is achiever. Do you want people to complete a task? Is it something that they should do or finish? Or explorer. Are there little hidden Easter eggs? Are there things that you can change and do and have those other kind of experiences? Also, the intrinsic reinforcement loop, which is things are naturally reinforcing. So make them small experiences and make them naturally, what is exciting about this? What is interesting? That will naturally reinforce people when they do something or when they experience something. And make those small experiences as you're developing them. More things on the UI, the user interface. Make sure that the text is large enough. You don't want to have tiny text on a tiny screen. So you want to make sure that everything is easily legible. That the file size of your AR experience will need to get loaded onto a phone or a tablet. So you want to do the best you can to minimize that file size, because that will when people step up, when they go to a restaurant, they don't want to sit there for 30 seconds as something is loading. You want them to have a relatively immediate 5, maybe 10 seconds of loading in order to get that set up. And my suggestion is when you're building experiences, have a bunch of micro experiences that they can choose from. So that kind of goes back to that gamification principle of do something and you're like, okay, that's cool. I've done that. Is there something else? Going back to the restaurant, it's, oh, I see the dish. That's really cool. That took a couple of seconds to do. If they're done and they're finished with that, great. If they want to go to another item of another dish, they swipe and they see another dish. Oh, that's kind of cool too. If they want to dive deep, then they have the option to do that. Let me see why this is the chef special and get a short video on that. But I wouldn't want to put all of that into one thing. You need to take a look at all of these dishes and view all of these things. You want to provide choice for the users in order to, let me see this, and let me choose what the next thing I want to do. So keep them all very small experiences.
So it can respond quickly as well.
That's correct.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. So for a developer just starting out with AR, what do you recommend they do first?
Everybody has a different skill set, especially coming into a field such as AR. You have developers coming in, graphic designers, people who've never done anything. You have coders, and they all have a skill set that's going to be different than other people and their skill set. So my suggestion is to just start building something. And you want to build something small that you have success with. And then you want to share that and get some feedback on it. And it's really about getting into the game and trying and seeing what works and getting success with that. And there are a variety of tools that are out there that you can leverage your strengths. If you are a coder, then start with Vuforia, build something that is familiar with coding and leverage what you already know. There are courses that are out there. There are websites that will take you step by step and give you some sample projects that you can do step by step in order to build them. If you're not a coder and you're coming from a design background, there are tools out there such as Zapper that you can start making an AR experience and have one done in about 5 minutes, and you can have success with that. So start from your strength, from your particular background, find a tool that has stuff that's already built out, and then create that experience. Then the second step is to start changing things and then make it your own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Johnny, unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. I do want to ask you one last question, which I ask all of my guests, which is, what would you like, in your case, I usually ask about VR, but in your case, what would you like AR to be like, let's say, 10 years from now?
10 years from now, I really think that it's going to be seamless in everyday life. I think that our kids are going to look back and kind of laugh at us when we have these phones and these big clunky things of tablets in order for us to experience AR. I don't think it's going to be an AR experience in 10 or 15 years. It will just be integrated into the things we do. We will have glasses or heads-up displays or projection units that display this information in that augmented way. We will have digital layers in front of us without having to hold up a device per se in order to have that experience.
So what you're saying is something I truly believe in and scares a lot of people, that AR and VR in the future, in reality, are all going to melt together. And we may get to a point where we may not know the difference between AR, VR, and R.
Right. And yes, there is a kind of a scary component to that, but I view it as there is we're looking at enhancements to things, and there's a lot that can be enhanced within our lives and make things a lot better.
100% agree with you. Well, Johnny, thank you so much. Before we go, do you want to tell people how to get in touch with you or give out any URL you'd like?
Absolutely. My consulting business is 2IT Education Solutions. It's the number 2, IT, educationsolutions.com. From there, we have a LinkedIn group, and I've also developed an online course at Udemy that talks about how to create AR experiences. You can develop them that day. So you can find all of that information at 2IT Education Solutions.
And we're going to add all this to the show notes. Also, Johnny will be on my August meetup. You'll be presenting there. And it's a BYOD night where people can bring their laptops, and you'll be showing them how to create 3 AR apps that night, right?
That's correct. We're going to have a bunch of fun.
Yeah, make sure you go to howtocreatevr.com/meetup and follow there, because you'll get a notification when that meetup is up in, I think, August 23rd, 2018. So, Johnny, thank you for the podcast. Thank you for the upcoming meetup you'll be with us. I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge.
Thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Well, thanks again, Johnny. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with me. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. For more episodes, check out howtocreatevr.com/iTunes or howtocreatevr.com/SoundCloud. If you'd like to watch video interviews and how-to tutorials all about VR and AR, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at howtocreatevr.com/YouTube. If you are ever in Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup, like I just mentioned, with lots of great VR and AR presentations, including the one that Johnny will be presenting in August. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. Finally, if you're interested in learning more about how to create VR, AR, and MR experiences, please visit howtocreatevr.com. So until the next episode, I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.